Hey, welcome back to the Jesus Magnet podcast. I'm your host Joel and I have Laura with me, and today we are joined by Rosie Stewart. How you doing, Rosie?
Good, thanks for asking.
We are so stoked to have you on. Thanks for coming on, and we are currently, for those following us around New Zealand, we're in Christchurch, well, just outside of Christchurch at the Oxford base with youth. Oh my gosh. With Youth with a Mission. I feel like my words are coming out a little bit too fast, faster than my brain. And we're at Youth with a Mission, Oxford, often referred to as YWAM. And YWAM put every single thing into acronyms these days.
Yeah. Absolutely. We love it.
So, thank you, Rosie, for joining us. I'm excited to hear your story.
Yeah, I'm excited
And, you said earlier, you're one of 12.
Yeah. One of 12 kids.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
That's a big family. That's a big Christmas.
Yeah, well, my family didn't really celebrate Christmas a lot, but yeah, definitely I can imagine it being a big Christmas.
True, yeah. Well, any gathering, would just be big.
It's never boring, to be
Now,
sure.
before we start, is that something that, like, you've got cousins and things and they've also got really big families?
No, so actually I only have one cousin who I've never met who lives in America, I believe. She's about 8 years old. But apart from that, I don't have any cousins. And I have two uncles who I've never met as well.
Really?
Yeah, but that's pretty much my extended family.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, so no aunts, just two uncles on my dad's side.
Wow.
And lots of brothers and sisters.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
we
awesome.
were the odd one out in our family.
Yeah.
Having lots of kids.
That's pretty cool, though.
Yeah.
So which number are you in the family?
So I'm the 10th. I have two younger brothers. So
You're the 10th.
Wow.
That's a lot of older siblings.
absolutely. It's good though. I wouldn't trade it for anything, honestly. I really love having a large family.
You know, that's really weird to hear that because my brother has my oldest brother, who's the old one in the family, has two younger brothers. So he's where you are in your family with the two younger brothers. And I always think, like, it's just strange to think that he could have, 8? No, 10? 10 more above him. Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Really cool. So what's the age gap between youngest to oldest, do you know?
I believe... So my oldest brother, he's actually my half brother. I've met him maybe a couple times in my life. The rest of my siblings are full siblings, so I don't know for sure what his age is, but I do know that he's maybe mid to late 30s.
Okay,
That's a rough estimate.
Yep.
Couldn't be too sure. And then the youngest, he is 14.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So we're turning 14 this year. I'm not too sure.
Nice.
Sorry, Robin.
There's a lot to keep track of.
That's good.
Hopefully he's not listening to this. He'll be like,
Yeah.
I don't remember my age.
That's all right. By the time he hears this, he might be a different age anyway. Shout out youngest brother. So let's keep going into your story. Where do you start?
It's a good question.
Where are you from?
Well, I'm born in Tauranga, so that's kind of where I identify my home as. But I grew up most of my life in Pataruru, which is in the South Waikato of New Zealand. So that's where I, sort of had my childhood. But then I moved back to Tauranga early last year, and so lived there and really got some real long-term friends there. And so I really just identify with the people there. And so I would say that Tauranga is my home.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So wonderful, Laura here. Where are you from?
Yeah, same place. Good old Tauranga. It's great.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Place.
All right. So you're brought up in, well, been living in Tauranga for a little while. So how did you get to know God? Where did God come into your life?
So I was saved last year, March, but I think, God was in my life before that, before I'd really accepted him and actually believed in him. Mm-hmm. So I'd say maybe a year before that, maybe a bit more than a year, I had known of God. So that was when I was living at home. So none of the rest of my family are Christian as of this moment. So, I didn't grow up with any of that influence or I never had any idea of what God was actually like.
Do they have a form of some other religion, or are they just
I would say yes, of a sort. Mainly my parents, my siblings are sort of just, doing their own thing, just living the life without spirituality. But my parents, I think so, yeah. But like I don't think it really has much Christian values. Yeah, so I didn't really grow up around that necessarily, but definitely like the spiritual elements had a huge effect on me as a kid. Like, I was just very aware of what was going on spiritually, especially in my household. But I was just never aware of the fact that there was like a good side to it. So I was like, just really aware of, for example, I always had this thing about the dark. Like I was always terrified of the dark, and I would cry every night before I went to sleep because I would close my eyes and I would see things. And so, I was just really aware of those spiritual stuff, but I just didn't like consider it to be abnormal to be aware of that. And so, when I grew up a little bit, I was like, oh, that's actually not a normal thing to experience as a kid. And I think like to some extent after becoming a Christian, I sort of realized that like most of those things that I was experiencing was because there was an open door, spiritually in that household, in the family. And so, I sort of went off track a little bit there, but
Yeah, no, that's all good.
Yeah.
So how did you end up, enticing after the Lord? Or him enticing you, I suppose. Pushing you towards him.
I think it like came down eventually to desperation. I'd really just come to a point in my life. Well, it was kind of gradual, like maybe it started when I was like 8 years old and went on till I was, my late teenage years.
How old are you now?
I'm 18.
18, yep.
So I was saved when I was 17. So I was like experiencing really heavy mental health issues that started when I was really young. So I didn't realize that it was coming on because it was during my like years of my actual brain developing, So it was so like... It was quite heavy, obviously, for a kid to experience.
What specifically, if you don't mind me asking?
No, it's worries. Depression and anxiety, severe for both. But I think the thing is, like, I believe that, like, with mental health problems, you can split them off into, labels and stuff, but generally it comes down to one thing. Like, there is one problem, And so it for me, it was trauma as well as, I think as well, like there is some sort of, what's the word? Genetics going on in my family that sort of encourage it, which I think is partly spiritual as well. But,
as in like a family curse almost of
that's
mental health.
Yeah, that's how I heard it described in the Christian world. But I always thought it was like genetics, but I'll get into that a little bit later. But, I lost my train of thought, but that happens a lot. I'm so sorry.
That's all right. You mentioned trauma. What was there an event that happened when you were growing up? I mean, I get it. I got two older brothers and they traumatized me. Was there something like that?
I think it was a mix of a lot of things, but I think in general, my family, obviously having such a large family, we grew up in a lot of poverty. So just before I was born, my parents were living in a bus and traveling around the country, so we didn't really have a steady home to live in. A lot of my siblings were born sort of in bizarre places. My sister was born on Great Barrier Island, just off the coast of Auckland. My brother was born in the middle of a flood.
Oh, wow.
And so, we're all kind of like... everywhere, but we settled down.
Did they call him Noah by any chance?
No, but people used to call my dad Jesus. So,
Does your dad resemble Jesus? Does he have a big beard and long hair?
Yeah, he had a big beard.
Oh,
it's a bit smaller now, but we were just known as that family,
Lots of respect right there. If he ends up listening to this, lots of respect. Keep the beard.
He's still got it. I think I'd be quite scared if he could stop it. I think he threatened to at one point, and I was like, please don't.
Actually, it's funny you say that. I've got a beard, and my wife here had never seen my face for, what was it, like 5 years of our marriage or something.
It was a while.
It was a long, long time. And I think she's only seen it once. Maybe.
Once or twice. Every
Yeah.
now and then you get sick of the bed and shave it all off, and so it's a bit of a shock.
I feel like my chin disappears. Like,
Yeah.
whole half of my face is just like chopped off.
Yeah.
And that's what it looks like in photos.
An extra white.
I got to keep it now.
I think it's funny because my dad, I think, has quite a big chin. Like in photos that I've seen of him when he was younger, he has quite a broad chin with like a cleft chin.
Oh, yeah.
And so I just cannot imagine him without a beard because like there's something going on underneath there. I don't know what, but I don't want to see it. But yeah, so yeah, I was just obviously growing up in a lot of poverty. Kind of, you can't help but have some trauma from that.
Yeah.
But I think still would probably be one of the most impoverished families that I know of in New Zealand, at least. So yeah, it was really hard. Like there were times where, we didn't have food, or when we did settle down into a house, we had a house fire in our kitchen, and that was just like, detrimental. Like because we couldn't recover from that financially. We didn't, I don't think we had any sort of support from the government or anything like that. And so, that like took out the electrical side of the house, and so we didn't have electricity running in the house for a number of years. Just use candles to read and all that sort of stuff.
Really? What about the winters?
In the winters, it would get cold, but
It just got cold.
we had fireplaces, but really, it was only in a couple of rooms in the house, and so it would get cold. But I don't know. We lived,
Yeah,
and honestly,
we
like
survived.
yeah, and well, I wouldn't trade it though, because I think, like with all the bad, and obviously, there was a lot of bad, the trauma and the mental health, and still recovering from some of that. But I think there's something so special about how I grew up, and I wouldn't want to trade that away, because it's like a bond I have with my family as well. Like it's so important to value, and I think as well, in really bad experiences, you're given like a different type of joy, like the joy that you experience is something so special because it's in contrast to that pain that you're experiencing. And so that's kind of what I learned from that, was that there are times where I was like, I wish I didn't go through all of that. Like I wish it didn't happen like that. But, thinking about, the special times I had with my family, I'm like, I don't think that many people get to experience times like that. And so I can't not be grateful for what I had in some sort of way,
Yeah. So you were traveling around a lot for a time. Where did you get pulled in and out of schools as well, or was that kind of?
So we did correspondence school,
yeah.
which in New Zealand is like online school essentially. Yeah. But before it was online, we got sent like school books that we would fill out, and we had teachers who mostly lived in Wellington, so we would call them, and that was kind of how we did things. When we did settle down, we still kept on with that, mainly because the school in that town was, one of the worst schools, I think, in the country. I'm not entirely sure of that, but I definitely know it was quite a bad school, especially from the stories that I heard growing up and stuff. I was like, I'm kind of glad I'm not there,
Yeah.
So it was quite hard, honestly, like being homeschooled, because you obviously don't have that like immediate connection with people, and like with kids who grow up in public schools, or just schools in general, they have that socialization, like they get that chance to develop those skills. And so
and with the sports teams and things like that, sometimes they're associated with the schools. Like I went to Wakatipu High School, but I think they had, actually, to be fair, I never played any team sports, but I think they had like Wakatipu High School basketball, and it was just like that school. There's only one school where I came from for high school anyway. But yeah, I can imagine that would be one of the potential cons. I'm sure you could get into those, but it will just be more difficult. Like you said, everybody else has already got the established friendships.
Yeah.
You're always coming in as a bit of an outsider.
Yeah, 100%.
And yeah. To be fair, your family would be quite intimidating as well. Like, just imagine meeting a whole tribe of people all related to each other.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, we were a little bit intimidating. But I think we were definitely more intimidated by other people than they were of us. because we kind of always saw them as like the outside world, you know?
Yeah.
And it was, you know, it's a bit odd to say it like that, but, you know, that's how it was. Like we didn't really understand how other people worked because, you know, we're so sort of wrapped up in our own little family that we just know how each other's brain works, and we don't think that people could be that different, or at least that's my experience. I can't speak for the rest of my family, but definitely my experience was like I really struggled to understand people for a while. I was like, oh, these people are so different from me, in so many ways. And you know, there were like I did have a few friends growing up, but it was never close because obviously, when we settled down in Pataduru, we were quite an outcasted family. Like we, you know, I think
just in the community.
Yeah, and I think in the community because we just looked so different from what they were used to, and we sounded so different, and we're different. You know, we just came in our bus and piled kids out, and you know, we talked differently, and you know, we were different. We didn't go to school, and so you know, I think, you know, especially kids in the community were like, this is the weird family, you know.
Yeah. And
I think that's fair. I can't blame people for thinking that because, you know, that's probably what I would think if I saw that on the street now. But I think that definitely had an effect on me mentally growing up. It was like, oh yeah, like we're completely different from everyone. We're not normal. And yeah, it kind of stuck with me that we always had something wrong with us, which I think was a really, like, obviously a really ungodly way to think. But I mean, that's how we grew up.
It's amazing because if I met a family that came out of a bus and there was like 15 people that rocked out of the bus, you know, you'd almost think it's a school trip, to be fair. But
yeah,
if you found out they were one family, I would be immensely intrigued to ask you guys all questions about, you know, how you do your lifestyle and, you know, you guys must all work together and sort of like your whole ability to work as one unit would be way better than any family, any company, anything like that. Would that be about right? Well, that's what I would assume from the outside.
Well, I obviously, because I'm on the younger side of the family, I didn't experience a lot of that lifestyle. I sort of grew up in a house, you know, grew up in the same place. I have very, very few like snippet memories of when we were living in the bus, but obviously I grew up with stories about, you know, that life, and so I have a sort of grasp of it.
So how long were you guys living in the bus? Up until which age?
I couldn't say like for sure, but it must have been around 12 to 15 years, something like that.
Yeah,
it was a long time. And you know, it wasn't just in a bus specifically, and there were times they were living on Great Barrier Island, I think, for a couple of years. And so there was times where they settled down in places, but it was essentially like a gypsy lifestyle.
Yeah,
you know, caravans, and we had like a couple vehicles that would sort of drive around, and we had like dogs and you know, the whole deal. So it was a bit like a gypsy lifestyle.
Okay, so let's just paint the picture here for anybody listening. You've got Rosie, who is got loads and loads of siblings. Did you ever feel like you were left out a little bit in the busyness of having that many siblings?
I think there was always sort of a battle for attention, you know, because there was only so much of it to go around.
I've actually got to ask this, who's the favourite?
I don't think there was actually, I can't name them, but there was definitely a favourite or a couple favourites. But I think, you know, our parents love us equally.
Absolutely, yeah.
So.
I was just kidding. So you grew up, you guys actually settled down, was it in Tauranga or just outside?
We settled down in Pataduru. In the South Waikato, yeah.
Okay, yeah. All right. Is that where your family is still now residing?
Yeah. So a lot of the older ones have left home. I was the last one to leave home so far. So I've got 3 siblings at home still, and then the rest are, you know, sort of in Tauranga and Hamilton and Auckland and
probably all over.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. So.
All right. And you, at which point did you start to have, was there somebody that you met that had Christ? And
I did know one person who was a Christian when I was living at home. And this was at a point where I was, sort of deteriorating mentally. And so I think they wanted to help, but there was definitely, like some misguided information coming towards me. Like I didn't fully understand because the information that they were giving me wasn't entirely sound.
This was the Christian person giving you information
about
so this Christianity?
About Christianity.
Yeah.
And so they wanted me to be a Christian. But I was kind of like, on the outside, I think I was like, oh yeah, like that's cool, that's interesting. But on the inside, I was like, I literally don't care about this. Like, this is just, I kind of had the perspective, which I think a lot of young people have, is that it's just an easy way out type of mindset to be a Christian. It's like, oh, like I don't want to deal with, the idea that I'm going to die someday, so I'm going to pretend that there's something afterwards so I can have peace, But so that's the kind of mindset I had. So, while they were saying all these things, I was just like, hey, whatever, like my heart was just not in it. There was times where they would talk about it for a while and I distinctly remember just shutting off my brain, like just not listening to a thing they said. And so, yeah, that was kind of, I guess, where it started because, God definitely worked through that in interesting ways. But yeah, I kind of fell away. Oh, I guess I wanted to believe it to some extent because I was like, well, if that was true, things would be great. But I was just like, well, I just can't believe that that's true. It just seems so just crazy to even alter my mind like that. Like it doesn't seem, I just couldn't believe it. It just didn't work for me.
It's really interesting you say that because I found it's sometimes that people in the world would rather not think that Christianity is true, not because of the hope of Christ or the hope of heaven or anything like that. It's because nobody at all wants to think about death. It's something that's
absolutely
put in the too hard basket. Even though it's a reality we all have to face. And that's where Christians look really weird because it's one of the only things they talk about. And you're right.
And there's so much hope in it for us.
There's so much hope in it. And everybody else never wants to talk about it because there's no hope. It's a horrible, horrible thought because everyone's going to die. That's a fact. Yeah. Statistically, the longer you live, the more likely you're going to die. What is it? I heard this funny guy at a birthday say, statistically, the more birthdays you have, the longer you live. It's like, okay.
Gosh, I mean, he's not wrong.
Said it's a healthy thing to do, have birthdays.
That's funny.
All right, so did this person that you had met, even though they might have been trying to bring Christianity across in a good light and it might have backfired a little bit. Did that plant any seeds in your heart?
I think so, yeah. I think, like when I look back on it, like the way I think about it is that God kind of found me in a really difficult situation and I was surrounding myself with people I should not have been surrounding myself with. And so I see it like even to be a miracle that there was someone there who was a Christian who could give me, something. Like even if it wasn't much, it was still something. And so I still see it as like God, finding me. But yeah, I definitely wasn't following God. There were times that I was, lying to him about praying or, lying to people about, being in prayer or like stuff just because I wanted to get them off my back. I was just like, I just don't, because they were quite like forceful. And I think that was one of the things that kind of pushed me away a bit. I was like, because not growing up with a lot of friends, I wanted to keep those that I had.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, I don't want to stop being friends with this person, but they're really pressuring me. And so there were times where I would lie about doing things so that they would stop pestering me to do them, which, you know, I think that's the first time I've said that, but that's the truth. But yeah, and so that was kind of my experience with it, with God. And I didn't hear God's voice, not that I can remember anyway. I think God speaks always, but I don't remember hearing God's voice or really, you know, connecting with God in any way during that time. But throughout that, you know, that year and a bit, I was like really wanting to leave home because I really saw it as like the source of all my problems, you know? I was like, this is what the problem is. This is why I'm depressed. This is why I'm anxious. This is, you know, if I leave home, then I can get myself sorted and things will be better. And, you know, at this point, I think it was December 2020. That's when things started to get really, really bad, like mental health wise. And I think that was around that time or a bit earlier on in the year. That was the first time I had like a suicidal thought. And I kind of like pushed it away. I was like, well, you know, I'm not actually planning anything, right? So it doesn't count. But it was like that just complete hopelessness, which I believe is, you know, that's a huge warning sign. Because that was something I was like, well, I don't know how I'm going to keep doing this. Like, this is too hard for me.
So how did you deal with that?
I didn't.
You didn't?
I don't think, I didn't really grow up knowing how to deal with anything. Like if I had, you know, anger, if I was really sad, I would just, you know, I just didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know how to deal with my emotions. And I think that was part of why I started to shut down when I was older. And I think looking back, like, I really see depression as a blessing. It sounds really weird to say, but, you know, I think the things that I was dealing and the things that I was handling when I was a kid were so overwhelming. And I wasn't dealing with them. And so it, you know, it came to this point where I was like, numbing out what I was feeling was the only way I could actually keep going. And I remember, you know, like being 8 years old and starting to realize that this was happening, but not really like knowing why it was happening. And so, yeah, I always thought it was like, that was growing up. Like when you grew up, you just lost all your joy. You just lost, you know, the life, like the color in your life. I thought that that's what happened. And yeah, I remember maybe when I was like 15, I was like starting to realize that what I was experiencing maybe wasn't normal because, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the term derealization or depersonalization.
No.
It's an effect of depression essentially, but it can also be apart from depression. But, essentially it's like derealization is when you're like disconnected from reality. And I find it quite difficult to explain it really well to people who haven't experienced it because it's quite a specific thing. But the best way I can explain it is like you feel like your body's just on autopilot, like you're not actually in control of anything you're doing. And I remember at one point I went to my parents and I was like, I feel like I can't see. Like I feel like what I'm seeing in front of me is there, but it's not there. Like it feels two-dimensional. And you know, they didn't really understand. And so I was like, well, it must not be real because, you know, my parents don't understand. So yeah. I just was starting to realize that what I was experiencing wasn't normal. And so I remember looking it up. I was like, what is this thing I'm experiencing? Like, why is this happening to me? Because I was just so disconnected. And I think there was like I would say probably up to a year of my life that I fully can't remember because of it, because it was so heavy.
Wow.
And that was basically like the inner effects of depression becoming external. That's kind of how I view it. Like it became so severe that what I was experiencing on the inside was affecting my vision, you know? It's quite heavy. But I remember looking it up and finding someone explain exactly what I was experiencing for the first time. And I was just like, had this massive panic attack. Like, felt like my heart was like going to stop because I was just panicking. Because I was like, this is real and this isn't normal. But at that point, obviously, I had no hope of it getting better because nothing on the internet, nothing I could find was saying that there's a cure for this.
Yeah.
And like even like medication, it was like, you know, maybe it would work. Like in most cases it doesn't. And so I was like, well, where's the hope?
Yeah.
And so, like, you can imagine, like, a 15-year-old just seeing that, and it's just like, this is my life now. This is what I have to live through. And so, yeah, just, like, pretty severe anxiety as well as that. But I think that's when I started to realize just, like, the hopelessness of it. Because I think when you're a kid, it's easy to have hope. I think that's,
Yeah.
even in really dark situations. But I think once you become a teenager, I think, as well as the fact that I was, going through a lot of changes.
Yeah.
I just started to realize that, I felt really hopeless about it. And so, I wanted to leave home because I was like, if I get out of here, things will get better.
Yeah. Did you have any idea of where to go, or just anywhere?
Well, at first it was just anywhere, but I think I wanted to stay with my sister, who had left home and she lived in Tauranga.
Yep.
So, I had we went through a huge time of trying to figure out how I was going to do it, because at the time it just seemed impossible. I was like, it just doesn't seem possible that I could leave home. It felt like a black hole, and I was just like sitting in it, just
Too hard, sort of.
Yeah, I could never get out of it, because I felt like it was a representation of my mental health. I think, like, that's kind of how I was viewing it. I was like, I'm never getting out of this feeling, and I'm never getting out of that place.
And you were just 17 at this time, or 16, 17?
Yeah, I was 17.
Yeah.
But actually, when I talked to my parents about it, they were actually okay with it at that point, which was really surprising. But and so I left home, I think late December, early January of last year. And so, and then after that, there's actually one experience that I wanted to talk about, which was New Year's last year. I was, on a camping trip with my sister and her family. And,
So it's 2020 to 2021?
Yeah.
That one?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so at this point I wasn't really a Christian. I didn't really know God or any of that. And this was kind of like the worst point of my mental health. And I had been talking to my sister about it a little bit, just like how bad it felt. And, she relates to quite a lot of it, as most of my family do, because I think, like I mentioned, I believe it is somewhat generational. And so, it was like that first time of actually externally processing a lot of the things that were happening to me and the things I was experiencing. So I had, like, there was a lead up to this point of just me being hopeless and me being, just not seeing any light in anything. And also as well, I just wanted to mention that I was drinking and smoking marijuana from 15, but it wasn't heavily from either, but it did have an effect on my mental health. I think
An effect in a negative way?
Yeah. Well, I don't think it was helpful. But there was like an insight, I think, somewhat, because when I smoked marijuana, I felt like there was something really wrong. That was my first experience when I smoked it. I was like, something's really, really, really off with everything, with my existence. It just felt so wrong. And that was like, I think the first time that I smoked it when I was 15, that was when I became like hyper aware of that feeling. I was like, oh, it's actually there. There is something wrong. Because I think before I was kind of ignoring it or just thinking it was normal somewhat. Or
hadn't noticed it properly.
Yeah, but I mean, I did know it was there, but I think...
You didn't acknowledge it.
Yeah, and so once I acknowledged it, it progressively got worse, because when you acknowledge something, it starts to come up more. But yeah, so, I had gotten to a really bad point. And I was saying things like, like I just can't find a reason to live. Like I can't see any reason at all. I can't see any good in this world. I can't see any good in my life. And
were you sharing these thoughts or feelings with anybody around you?
I was sharing it with my sister.
Yeah.
Pretty much just my sister. And she, she understood a lot of it. And I think in some ways it was good, and in some ways it was like we were bouncing off of each other because we both felt the same way. And so in some ways it was helpful, and in some ways it was sort of unhelpful, because I was like, I'm not, getting a perspective of goodness.
Yeah.
I think she tried because she didn't want me to see me that way. But feeling the same way, it's hard to give hope when you don't have hope.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that night on New Year's, I smoked. That was the last time I smoked, and it was also one of the first times I smoked for maybe 6 months or something. So it was hit me really hard, and I took quite a lot as well, which is probably one of the reasons. But I felt this sort of anxiety building up, and I realized that I was going to have a panic attack. But it was not. How do I explain this? It wasn't like the panic attacks that I had before, where it was it wasn't like a physical panic attack. It was like an emotional one, I felt like everything was just suddenly I was like, this is it. I'm just tired of this. I can't do it anymore. It's just way too much. And I remember just I was laughing 1 second, and then suddenly I was just breaking down, and I just was just crying on the ground. I was like, I can't take this anymore. And my sister obviously was like, well, what's wrong? What's going on? Why is this suddenly happening? And I was just like, I can't do it. I can't, this is just pointless. Life is just pointless, And I remember sitting there, it was 12 o'clock. It just hit the new year. And I remember looking off into the trees in the distance, and I was like, those trees are there, but they're not there, it's just a picture. And I can't interact with it. I can't feel from it. I'm not experiencing it there. And I was like, I have to be here. I have to be in this life, but I can't experience the goodness of it, if that made sense. And I remember feeling really specifically, I felt like there was a chain on my heart, and it was just pulling me down with the world. And I felt like I was just falling into this black hole I just could not get out of. And it felt like my whole life was just crumbling in on me. And it was just this is it. This is the moment where it just ends, because I couldn't see a point. And my sister was she told me that she understood. And she was like, I think you've got depression. And, at that point, I sort of knew that I had depression, but I always thought the depression was something worse than what I was experiencing, because people were always like, don't say that you have depression if you don't know what depression is like. So I was kind of okay, I'll just stay away from that then. I didn't want to acknowledge it. But when she said that, I was like, oh, this is real. I can't disregard this anymore. I can't belittle it anymore, because that's what I was doing. I was like, oh, I'm fine. I don't have depression. I'm not suffering. I'm okay. It was just in that complete place of denial. And so when she said that, something just sort of cracked in me, and I was just completely just done for. But my sister was like, you need to get some help. You need to do something, because you're scaring me. The things you're saying are terrifying me. I don't think she used the word terrifying, but she said that I was scaring her. And so I think I've always been sort of a push through type of person. And so I was like, well, I might as well try, I might as well try. Yeah. And so I went to the doctor, and I told them maybe a couple minutes of what I was experiencing. They're like, okay, you have depression, anxiety pretty severely. And they went through some steps of is it your lifestyle? Does your lifestyle need changing? What are you doing? And at that point I had started going to, I dropped out of school because I just was not, with mental health that bad. There was definitely a point when I was younger where I couldn't even leave my room. For weeks, I just didn't get out of my room. And I would sit in the dark, and I would just, on my phone, on my laptop, just not interacting with the world. And so that's, sort of a visual of how bad it got. But I was like, okay, well, I want to try. So I applied for this catch up course at a university, which I did. And, I was trying to pull it together. So I went to the doctor, and I got medication, and I started going on that. And, that kind of, for me, it didn't help. I know that definitely it helps some people hugely. For some people it's a miracle, but for me it didn't help. And at that point I was starting to have panic attacks, or not panic attacks, anxiety attacks, because they weren't quite as severe as a panic attack, but I was having anxiety attacks every day, consistently.
And this was on the medication as well?
Yeah, this was on the medication. And so I had also decided that I was going to go to church. That was one of the things that I tried to, I decided that I was going to do. So I Googled the closest church to where I was staying, and then I went there. I think I bused there or walked there. I can't remember, actually, I can't remember. But I didn't know anyone there, and I just sort of walked in and, walked out. But I think, the worship there, like I didn't understand it at the time, but it was definitely like God speaking to me, because like what I felt was like this, I felt like I was being like bared open. Like I felt like my soul was just like there, and it really hurt. Like it didn't feel good at all. It didn't feel like peace. It didn't feel like, it didn't feel good. But what I did feel was something. Like I felt emotion, I felt like pain, and I cried, I cried during the worship. And it was like a really, really vulnerable experience for me. And then I got up and I left, and I went back the next week, and, I didn't talk to anyone, but at the end of the service, for some reason, I felt like I had the courage to go and ask for prayer. And I don't know where I got that courage from, because, I didn't, I don't know where it came from. And I think it was the Lord, honestly. I think he prompted me to go up there. And I asked for prayer, and they were like, "Oh, would you like prayer for?" And I was like, "I have depression." I could barely get the words out, though. Like I was like choking on them as I said them, because I felt like, even though I told my sister, it felt like the first time I was saying it. I felt like suddenly like that was real.
Yeah.
And they prayed for me. I don't remember exactly what they prayed for, but they were treating it like very seriously. Like I felt like they just. Like the way I felt was like the church kind of like picked me up, and like I was really delicate. And I still was like so like hurt and broken at this time, because I just felt like, like everyone else had something and I didn't have that thing. Does that make sense? Like I didn't have, like it was kind of like this why me attitude. Like why did I have this life?
Yeah.
Like why was I cursed to grow up? Like and I'd always sort of had that thought as a kid, like it felt like a cruel like chance. I just felt like, man, I could have been born any other way, any other person, and it would have been better than this. And I know that's not necessarily true, but me as a kid, that was how I saw it, because the kids around me, the kids I knew in my town, they were, to me, they were all like blessed, and we were just cursed. And so, having that sort of idea in my mind, I was like, I'm never going to be free from this. But after they prayed, someone else came up who wasn't even praying for me, but I think he sort of saw it, and, he got a word from the Lord, and he saw a vision of me being carried on a stretcher, and the stretcher was carried by 6 people. And I was like, cool, like what the heck? Like it was so weird, like because I hadn't really been introduced to the idea of like getting visions. I was like, okay, cool, thanks for that. But thinking like kind of half thinking this person was crazy, but I was like, thank you. But the pastor who prayed for me introduced me to this girl or lady who was running a home group. And he was like, can I tell her that, like what you told me? And I was like, oh, sure. And he told her that I was depressed, and she was like, oh, like, you can come to my home group. Like, you can totally, like, we're doing it tomorrow. Like, you can just come along and, meet people, and we can support you and stuff. And I was like, for some reason I did it, because I don't think it would have been very in character for me to do it. But for some reason I did do it.
Yeah.
And I went, and
was this a bit different because you had always felt like an outsider, that nobody wanted you outside of your family, like that you're outcasts, and then going to church and this lady just going, come along, just
Yeah.
come, arms open wide.
Yeah, I think it was actually quite an emotional experience, because she was like so eager to love me. And, she's still very like precious to me. She's a very, very beautiful person, but she was just so eager and like so ready to love me the first time that she saw me. And, you know, that was quite, like you said, a new experience. All of those people in my home group as well, like they were very, very eager to love me.
Did you want to say a special thanks to any of them if they end up listening to this?
Actually, a lot of them went on to do a DTS with me, and so they're some of my closest friends.
Very cool.
Yeah, they're amazing people, and I'm very grateful for them. But yeah, so I went there, and I was kind of like, they can testify to this. Like I would just sort of sit in the corner of the couch where no one could sit next to me and sort of huddle into myself. And I remember just staring at the floor, and that was the only thing I'd look at. I wouldn't look people in the eyes or anything like that. I would just stare at the floor and think like, you know, this is going to be like over soon, essentially. And I would be like so jittery that like if someone would ask me a question, because I'd be like doing Bible studies and stuff, I would just like sort of freak out a little bit or like panic. You know, it was like always the most like, it was like the peak of my anxiety. It was like, they're going to ask me a question. And also like as well, like I mentioned that we kind of grew up in a secluded family, like, and we didn't go to school. So I didn't have very good social skills at all. Like that's not something I'd really developed outside of my family.
Yeah.
And so I was like hyper aware of that. And I always like thought like, you know, that was something wrong with me as well. Like I was never going to be normal because, you know, it's just the way I grew up, and I'm never ever going to fit in. And, you know, my social skills was like a huge show of that. And so I was really self-conscious of the way I spoke and everything. I was just like, this is just like, I'm so different and so weird and all the stuff. So yeah, I just kind of saw everyone around me as if they were better than me, like way above me in every way. And I, you know, that to me, that was truth. Like it wasn't just something I was like half believing. That was like ultimate truth. And because that's just how I thought growing up. It's just like, everyone's better than me. Everyone's smarter than me. They know how to live life, and I don't know how to live life. So, but those people were so like graceful with me and gentle with me. And so a few weeks later, you know, a few weeks of, can't name exactly how many weeks, but a few weeks of going to this home group and sitting in the corner not saying anything. And then this lady actually from YWAM came, and she was sharing her testimony and talking about like women in the Bible and stuff, and she was just this, like amazing woman. Like she's just so like passionate and like and like excited. Her name was Beza.
Beza.
Yeah, she's I think from Alaska.
Beza from Alaska.
I think so. I'm not exactly sure.
Wow.
I don't know her very well, but she was from YWAM. And yeah, so she was just sharing. And I remember just like looking at her, and in that moment I just like thought like, because she just had so much like hope and like her life was just so wonderful, and she was just talking about her relationship with God and like all of these things, and I was just like, it's just so like, this is quite a bad thought, like, and I was quite ashamed of it, but I was thinking like, it's not like, it's just not fair. Like, why does she get everything and I get nothing? And I was just, you know, sort of breaking down on the inside, because I was just, again, that thing coming back of like I'm just cursed. Like it's just who I am. Like I can't get away from it. But I think while hearing her testimony, like something that really like, I think the reason it really hit me was because she didn't grow up in an easy household. She didn't have an easy life, and in a lot of ways, like she was in some ways like me, or, you know, had experienced some of the things that I experienced. And so, you know, it just didn't make sense to me anymore. I was just like, why? Like, I just didn't understand. And there was like a little response time after she shared, and she was like, you know, just asking what we thought of what she was talking about, and I was just crying. I just started crying, and because I just couldn't hold it in anymore, essentially. And then she was like asking me what was wrong, and like, you know, I didn't understand, because I don't think my home group at that time knew that I wasn't saved, like that I wasn't, you know, actually a believer, because I never really said anything. I didn't really open up to them.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so they, well, she like prayed for me. She was like, have you ever actually been saved? Do you have a moment in mind when you were saved? And I thought about it, and I was like, no, I haven't actually. And then, I just felt like, while she was praying for me, I just felt like this overwhelming feeling. I remember just like breathing really heavily and just like, like actually feeling the presence of God. And it felt like something that was a little bit out of reach, but I wanted it so bad, if that makes sense. Like, it wasn't like this moment of suddenly everything coming together and, complete healing, but it was like this, maybe this is real, like, sort of moment, And I think I was in a lot of denial when I had that moment, but looking back on it, I was like, that was, God was so in that, and he was speaking so much to me, and he was right in front of me. But I think I just couldn't accept that there was hope, because I had just been denying it for so long.
Yeah.
And so, I remember walking outside and got like a breath of fresh air afterwards, and I just like had this tiny sliver of hope, like this little mustard seed. And like it wasn't a lot, and I remember like it immediately, like thinking about it, I was like, oh, like maybe there is hope, and then immediately like the thoughts came crashing down, like absolutely not, like all of that just like piled over it. Sorry. But and so I just I would immediately get trampled, but the fact was that I actually had experienced hope for the first time in I couldn't name how many years, but definitely since I was a kid. And so like after that it was things changed a lot.
So what sort of things changed?
Well, I haven't had a panic attack since that night, since I got saved. So God healed that in me, as well as like depression has, because it used to be like all the time, and I still experience it in small amounts sometimes, which I think is normal. But I think like since then I didn't fully realize that it was gone, but now looking back on it, I was like, I actually think that was the moment that it sort of lifted off.
Wow.
As well as like after that, I started to get like my anxiety got a lot worse, which was actually because I believe that the depression lifted off, and it was like that numbness had gone away. And like with God, I was actually able to deal with like those feelings, of like fear and stuff, because without any hope, like the fear will just completely consume you. Like there's just, you can't get away from it. And so, like that's why, again, I said that depression was actually a blessing, because you can't deal with a fear that consumes you that much. And so,
when you were talking earlier about how you left that Bible study and you had that little bit of hope, and then you felt that it was gone afterwards, like taken from you. It's sort of the parable of the sower came to mind. You've probably been told this before, but I thought, it'd be good maybe I'll read it out for the listeners to see that this is an example today from what Jesus was talking about 2,000 years ago. And he says it's in Matthew 13. Matthew 13. And he says that same day Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such a large crowd gathered around him, and he got into the boat and sat. And while the people stood there on the shore, he told them, by the way, that's really interesting how he's on a boat on the just hanging off the shore from all these people that he's teaching, because we all know that Jesus doesn't need a boat. He could be standing on that water.
True.
Then he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed, and as he scattered the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came up and ate it. Some fell on rocky places, where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly, but the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they were withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, and they grew up and they choked the plants. Other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop of 100, 60, or 30, which was so on. Whoever hears them, let them hear. When Jesus came to him and asked, "Why do you speak to these people in parables?" he replied, "Because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has been given more, they will have abundance, and whoever does not have, they will be taken from them. This is why I speak to them in parables." So, and then later on, he talks about what he means by the parable. If I skip down to verse 18, he says, "Listen then to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches it away with what has been sown in their heart. This is the seed that was sown along the path. The seed falling on the rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. And then one trouble or persecution comes from the word, and they fall away quickly. The seed falling among the thorns refers to the one who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitful of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is one who produces a crop yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown." So it's interesting hearing what your experience, not saying that it was not good soil, but at the time you were on a rocky road. Mm-hmm. Where you were currently standing was not fully ready to, I suppose, take root in your life. Mm-hmm. Would that be accurate?
I think partly, yeah. I definitely didn't understand how to hear God's voice and all of that stuff. So I didn't. Even after that, I was still disobeying God hugely, and so there was definitely, I definitely was on rocky ground. But I think I still regard that as the moment that everything changed.
For sure.
But it still took me a while, and I'm really grateful for the people who sort of stuck with me, because I think sometimes people just assume that, or, I've heard people assume that, once you're saved, it's just everything's solved, you've been saved from depression and anxiety, that's over now, you don't have to think about that anymore. But it was still very much real for me. And so, and in some ways, like I said, it got worse because the depression was lifted off, which was the covering. And so, I was just living in a lot of fear. And there was a lot of times where I doubted God because even though depression and stuff had lifted off, I hadn't really recognized that yet. And I was still, in a lot of emotional pain. So I, a lot of the time, blamed God for that, knowing he was real at this point. I was like, well,
yeah, why did you make me like this?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was like, well, if you were real, then, why did all this stuff happen to me? And that's something I did wrestle with a little bit, as well as the fact I wasn't really sure that I was going to be healed, from anxiety. And it was something I was living with every single day. I felt spiky, I felt like everything was spiky and everything was scary. And so I had to come to this point where I had to decide whether I was going to follow God or not, if he wasn't going to heal me. Because, I think that was something that I had sort of that was my hope in God, that he was going to heal me.
Yeah.
But after recognizing that God was real and knowing that God was real, God was like, okay, that I'm real. What are you choosing? Are you choosing what I can give you, or are you choosing me? And so he didn't give me healing for anxiety right away. And it's definitely a journey I'm still on, and there has been huge healings for that. But it was that moment of being like, actually, I've got to choose God, not what he can do.
Yeah.
And so that was a huge moment for me. And it was a really hard thing, it sort of took a while for me to get to that point of that, because to me, anxiety was everything, and it was affecting everything. So I was like, how can I live with this? But, making that choice of following God either way, was just so powerful. And I think really glad that I chose that. But yeah, it's just, he's has just been so good in that way, and he just like his timing has just been so good.
So was there any healing that God did bring in your life with depression and anxiety?
Yeah, so I went on a few months after getting saved to do a DTS at YWAM.
Which is an acronym, another YWAM acronym,
sorry,
by the way.
acronym.
Discipleship Training School.
Yeah. So it's a 5-month course, and I think 2 months of lectures on just who God is, and and just things that give you a foundation, which is exactly what I needed. And so I went into that being the person that I was, being spiky, and I think there was just so much breakthrough and so many moments where I had healing, and actually being able to process like memories and thoughts and feelings that I'd experienced. But specifically, I remember where I had chosen against fear for the first time. And there's something in psychology, it's called like brain pathways, and they use it a lot for like depression, because basically what depression is it's narrowing the pathway to where like dopamine can come through. And it narrows it so much that you don't really get that dopamine, so you don't get the happy feeling. And that's why it feels like your color is being sucked out of your life, is because you're not getting those chemicals in your brain. And so that's what medication is supposed to counteract, is that. And it's supposed to like force open that brain pathway. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. That's very much my version of explaining that. It's a lot more complicated than that, but that's how I understand it. But there was a moment where I was with my friends, and I had started to feel the anxiety come on. And at this point, that was a pretty common thing. Like, I would be having fun, and then suddenly it just sort of slumped me, and I would just shut off, and everyone would sort of notice it. It was like this black cloud around me. It was just started to, eat up at me. And I would just start to hear these things, like, really clearly, like hearing this fear in my mind, and, just telling me things and telling me I wasn't worthy, and telling me that the people around me didn't love me, and just these horrible things, and it would kind of consume me. But I remember, I think we were parked in a Kmart parking lot, and I was just like, I think I told my friends, I was like, I'm not doing well, or at least they noticed, and they were like, okay, we're going to pray for you. As they were praying, they were like, oh, we really feel like you should speak out something. And I was like, no, I can't, like, I couldn't do that. And I just started to feel like that anxiety, like I couldn't pray against it. I felt like I just didn't have the power to. But like it started to eat me up, because I was saying yes to it. I was giving into it. And so it got worse and worse. And I came to this point where I just got like, like this, I feel like this righteous anger from God, where I was just like, I don't want this thing controlling me anymore. Like, I've had enough of it. And so I prayed out against it for the first time for myself. And it didn't, like, the fear didn't go away. Like, it didn't disappear. But I suddenly felt like I was lifted up, above it, that I wasn't sitting in it anymore, because I wasn't a part of, like, it wasn't me. I wasn't identifying it with myself anymore. Yeah. And so it was just like this huge breakthrough. And relating it to the pathways thing, the reason it felt so impossible for me to go against it, for me to choose against fear, was because that pathway had been closed off. Like, I'd never chosen that before. It wasn't something that was open to me. Yeah. It was like choosing to walk through the bush rather than on the pathway that I paved for myself after years. Yeah. And so it was just, that's why I felt like it was impossible. But the second I did it, I was like, this isn't impossible. This is something I could do. Yeah. And, that was a huge revelation for me. It was something that completely changed my life, because I had always thought that it was, depression and anxiety was something that just happened to you, and that you didn't really have a choice over. And in some ways, you don't necessarily have a choice how you feel. But you have a choice to what you do and what you choose in those times of that feeling. And so, and after that, I wasn't completely like healed from it. It would still come on. And there were a lot of times where I did choose fear over, over God. But knowing that I had that choice and that's something I could actually do. And I started to feel like my mind was opening up. I remember taking a walk with my sister on the beach, and I was just like, I feel like it just suddenly, like, I have options now. Like, I have that pathway I can go down. And, it's just completely changed my life.
Wow.
It's really crazy. I never thought of it.
So would you say that main breakthrough was when you decided to pray with your mouth?
I think, yeah, I think God had been prompting me a lot to do that, but yeah, it was just that the fear would consume me so much, and I was so feeling driven, like I thought that if I didn't feel hope, then the hope wasn't there. That's kind of how my mind worked. I was like, feelings are everything, and so that moment was actually, it was to do with me standing up and actually taking what God was offering me, but it was also sort of the realization that feelings weren't something that necessarily were controlling me, or that had to control me.
And
so
that's good.
Is that saying feelings are indicators, not dictators, right? So they can tell you things about yourself, but they don't dictate what you do.
They're not good or bad in themselves. They're tools.
I think for fear, though, I think because like, there's general emotions that everyone deals with, but I think anxiety is kind of on a different field, because I sort of saw it as the enemy's voice, because the things that it was saying was exactly what the enemy would say. And so it really, like, the way I see it, I was being controlled by the enemy with depression and anxiety. That was something that the enemy had hold over me. But I mean, I think it's different for everyone. I couldn't, that isn't a generalization, but for me, it was the enemy speaking to me. And so, yeah.
What's a practical step for people to take when they suffer a anxiety attack or a panic attack?
It's a good question. Something I'm still figuring out, but I think what generally helps for me is to, there's always breathing. Like, if you're in the middle of a panic attack, you have to take those easy steps of just breathing and just trying to find something that will calm you down, because that's to the extreme. And something that helps for me when I feel like I'm getting there is like splashing my face with cold water and stuff, because when it starts to become a physical thing, you kind of have to take it how it is. Like, you have to take it to a physical level. So if you're panicking and you're hyperventilating, you have to slow your breathing and you have to drink water, and you do those things because it's at a physical level. But when it starts to come on, and I'm kind of on this journey now of recognizing when this dark cloud starts to sit over me, and I think for me it's the people. Like, I need people, because from generally I would isolate myself. Because I'm experiencing this thing, I need to experience it, and I need to go and hide, and I don't want people to see me like this, and I don't want to be, because this, I don't necessarily want to identify with this part of myself, but actually, because basically what's happening at least when I go into an anxiety attack, is I, or like have those moments where I shut down, it's like my prefrontal cortex shuts down, which is basically the part of you that relates to people. And so I actually notice myself and observe myself sort of avoiding eye contact, because what that does is that you feel like people are having empathy with you and relating to you, and that's what actually helps you calm down, is to know that you're not actually in it alone. And God is a huge part of that as well, like prayer and actually recognizing that God's there with you, and that closeness with God is something that helps a lot as well, because God is a God of communion. But yeah, for me, like, when I can, there have been a lot of moments where I've felt something come on, and I either have the choice to linger on that feeling and let those thoughts sort of go around in my mind, or I can say, like, okay, no, I'm not going to deal with that right now, and sort of consume myself with people, like bring myself to people and just have a stupid joke, or just do something stupid or not stupid, but like do something silly and just sort of distract myself from that. And that's, at the moment, that's how I'm sort of avoiding that happening to me. But, you know, that's not to avoid feeling emotions altogether, because it is really important to feel what you're feeling and process what you're feeling. But with anxiety, I don't believe anxiety is helpful. Or like the condition of anxiety. I think, you know, there's feelings of anxiousness which are normal. That's you know, that's human nature. But anxiety itself is, you know, I believe the enemy's voice. And so, you know, what I'm doing when I'm choosing that is I'm choosing against God. And obviously that's not to condemn. Like, there's a lot of times where I still choose it because that's what I'm used to doing. That's what people are used to doing. Is, you know, if you have a really strong feeling, you're like, oh, this is me. This is me feeling this thing. So I'm going along with this, and this feels right because it's what I'm feeling. It's what humans do. And so choosing against that's not an easy thing. And I'm not disregarding that. It's not easy, but...
That's good. The reason I ask is because I, over the last few years, like I can relate to this. I've actually suffered very bad anxiety attacks, panic attacks myself. And one thing that I've done, which has been tremendously helpful, is worship music.
Yeah.
So I will sit there at the end of the bed, or I'll be lying down at the end of the bed. It always comes to me at night. I don't know why. It always hits me at night, in the middle of the night. And I'll play some worship music. And, you know, I got to select a couple of songs that I put all my focus into. And it destroys it. I've never ever seen, because the very first time it happened, I was in Invercargill, and I now believe that it was actually a demonic attack, this one in particular, because throughout it was the worst it was the first one I'd ever had, it's the worst one I've ever had. And the light bulb in my bedroom exploded at the end of it.
Wow.
So I know it was more than just in my head and my spirit. It was something else. And over the years, being married to my wonderful wife Laura, I hadn't had these attacks for a long time, and they come very, very rarely. But they're pretty bad when they do come. And we've learnt to combat them with worship music, and then Laura would pray over me just while I'm worshiping, and it goes from this tremendous feeling of fear and everything collapsing, where I can hardly breathe, and I could totally relate to splashing water on your face. I used to do that, and I needed something cold. I needed to stand outside. If it was winter, I'd stand outside. It didn't matter what I was wearing. And but this took it to a whole new level of choosing a few songs that I would listen to and focusing everything on that. And it went from this almost fearful cry to this trembling fear of the Lord. That brought this huge amount of joy, and it just destroyed it. And real quick too. It was weird because I can't remember how long it was. Laura, the first time, when we were at the Tonks place,
it was quite a while.
It was about half an hour or something. Like, it was a long time. Not being able to do anything, and I didn't know what was happening. I couldn't understand it. And so I have a lot of, I can relate to what you're saying with living and suffering with anxiety. And if anybody's listening, you know, if you suffer from that, it's worship music for me. It just destroys it. It goes so quick. God is so good and so powerful through that. I suppose pick a song that has like a true anointing on it. And amazing. I use the song Spirit Lead Me. That one's really good.
Yeah, I think like in those times, definitely like the thing that will connect you to God will be the thing that will get you out. Like for me, you know, I do relate to worship music as well. Like I have done that before as well. But like, yeah, you know, essentially it's relating to God in some sort of way, whether it's through people or music or, you know, whatever it is that you do, maybe journaling, or, you know, whatever it is. But it is like making that connection with God. But I think the thing is like during those times, it's not easy to make that choice to connect with God. And for me, definitely like, you feel a resistance because the last thing that the enemy wants you to do in those times is to connect with God. And so, you know, like, you know, I mentioned like before, like the first time that I prayed out against it, praying out was so scary. Like that was the last thing that I wanted to do. I felt desperate to get away in that situation, because that's, you know, that's going in the opposite spirit. And so when all of your feelings and your entire body is pushing you in one direction and then you're choosing to go in the opposite spirit, like you're going to feel resistance.
Yeah.
And so that's how you know that you're doing the right thing, is that you're feeling like that resistance. And, you know, if you're feeling that resistance and, you know, you're feeling that impossibleness of going that way, like, you know, you need to know that like that isn't impossible with the Lord with you. Like, you know,
Come on, that's good.
yeah, maybe with, you know, I've never experienced pushing through that without God, so I couldn't speak for that. But I think, you know, for me, I don't think I could do it without God, because I just wouldn't have the power. But with God, like he's so far above this, and I think like you've experienced this as well, like with worship music. Afterwards, you feel this joy because you know, I think it's that realization that God's so far above that, and yeah, it's just
that's really good.
You know, connecting with God through that.
So, yeah, is there anything else you would like to share with us before we end up finishing?
Yeah, maybe just to say that, like, just my journey has been primarily around mental health, like so far, you know, with God, and I think, you know, coming into a relationship with God, coming into being a Christian and into this community, I didn't really feel like I was encouraged or like told that, you know, it was something that actually God can heal. You know, even before I was a Christian, like looking it up on Google and not really finding much at all about, you know, actually this being something that can be healed, something that can go away entirely from your life. And I think that's so discouraging, especially for young people, you know, trying to search for an answer. And you know, I was in that place trying to search for an answer to this problem I was facing, and it's so discouraging to find nothing. But you know, the second I found out like God was the answer, like I just felt like just like if you haven't heard that God is the answer, like He is, that He's the answer to it. And I know how big it feels. Like it feels astronomical, and it feels like nothing could be above that. But I think that was a testimony for me to who God was as well, because if you know how big depression feels, if you know how big anxiety feels, when you know the truth that God is bigger than that, you know, you have an understanding. You know, you have an understanding that how big God is. And yeah, just like always, God is always bigger than that feeling. And that sort of blows my mind, because, you know, that feeling could feel like existential. And, you know, with every bad, there's so much more good.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's just amazing. So I hope that's an encouragement to people listening who experience that, because, you know, I don't feel like it's talked about enough, that God is the answer to that.
Yeah.
It's a touchy subject, especially in church. But, you know, God is the answer.
Well, I definitely took a lot away from just listening to your testimony. Rosie, you are a powerful woman of God.
Thank you.
And, man, you are somebody not to be messed with. If the devil's listening to this podcast, you are strong, and you know the Lord, and He's carrying you through those trials, and it's, you know, it's a bit like going to the gym. You know, it's heavy, it's hard, it's sweaty, it tears those muscles. But as they heal, you become stronger. You you can lift more weight. You can throw those punches a lot harder. And when I listen to this testimony, like through your life, you've had these trials of depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts. And now this has led you to a life where people with those same trials, you're going to be pulling them out like a fireman pulls out people from a fire. And yeah, that stretcher, you know, you'll be carrying people out of the fire and, you know, saving them. And I see that in you, you know, you've got such a passion for God, and you know where you're at with God. You know that He's the one to run to. As a good father, you know, sometimes people, we feel worried or we feel anxious and we run away from our Father because we feel like we're in trouble. But the Father says, you know, when you're feeling anxious, when you feel like you're in trouble, run to me. I have my arms open wide, like the prodigal son, you know. And yeah, I think that was really, really neat testimony. So thank you so much for coming on the Jesus Magnet podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're an amazing person, Rosie.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Jesus Magnet podcast, obviously find us on Facebook. Join the Jesus Magnet Coffee Club if you want to support us. And yeah, we'll see you next time on the Jesus Magnet podcast.